A tuple, also pronounced tuple, can be defined as an immutable sequence of values of any type. Understanding what a tuple is a piece of cake after having studied lists in detail. The reason is that tuples are very similar to lists. The key difference here is that they are immutable, which means that as opposed to lists, they cannot be modified once they've been created. And this is the main reason why you'd want to use a tuple instead of a list in certain situations. When you're creating a sequence of elements that you know you won't need to modify later, the recommended practice is using a tuple and not a list, which lets Python optimize the memory storage for your elements. A tuple can be created with the following syntax, based on a sequence of elements in parentheses and separated by commas. As you can see, the syntax is similar to what we've used to create lists, except here we're using parentheses instead of square brackets. The created tuple can be used in any context where an expression is allowed, such as the right-hand side of an assignment. Take a look at the following example. Here, we're creating variable t as a tuple containing strings a, b, c, and d. If we then pass variable t as an argument to a print call, the output shown on the terminal includes all elements of the tuple, also in parentheses and separated by commas. Python supports a shorthand notation to create tuples, based on omitting the surrounding parentheses altogether. Here, we're creating tuple t2 with the same 4 strings as t. When printing t2, we observe the same output on the terminal, including the parentheses that we omitted in its definition. A special case in the creation of tuples needs to be considered when our intention is including only one element in it. In this case, the one element in the tuple must be followed by a comma for Python to identify the new tuple as such. This applies whether we opt for the standard notation using parentheses or the shorthand notation omitting them. Notice the presence of the comma here as well. In this example, we're creating a tuple called t that contains only string a. When we print t, the output shown in the terminal has the same format that we used to create the tuple, including the trailing comma. Alternatively, we can use the notation that omits the parentheses as shown in this definition of t2. When we print this variable, the same exact output is shown as before, including both the trailing comma and the parentheses. Now, what would happen if you forget to include that comma, as shown in this definition of t3? Well, in that case, Python would simply ignore the parentheses and interpret the string to be a standalone value, as opposed to an element in a tuple. This print statement reveals that t3 is actually not a tuple, but just string a. In the same way that we can have empty lists, we can also have empty tuples. The syntax to create an empty tuple is based on the use of open and close parentheses, with no content in between. In this example, we're setting t to an empty tuple. When we print it, the output shown in the terminal uses the same notation as what we use in the tuple definition, to represent the fact that this tuple is empty. If you enjoyed this content, you may watch the rest of this lesson at computersciencecamp.com, linked in the description below. You'll be able to follow along with coding samples and problems in our embedded code editor. Drop your questions in the comment section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to help support the channel. Thank you, and happy coding!